Released in 2016 for the PlayStation 3 and 4, Persona 5 hit the Japanese market and went international less than a year later. Showered with praise and high review scores back then and still ranking highly in many people's lists, it has become a favorite for best game of the decade for many. How dropping the Shin Megami Tensei label helped accelerate this storm of success, I can't say. But the game was received to enough fanfare that a DLC expansion was developed and subsequently released in 2019 for Japan and 2020 for international audiences. And while 2020 was a disastrous year for life as we knew it, with its impact permanently altering the lives of many and accelerating trends we'd already seen before, the COVID-19 crisis was a fantastic circumstance for gaming. Animal Crossing New Horizons launch was explosive, as the newfound need for social interaction over a distance and its low entry level to video games made a perfect mix to sink hundreds of hours into. Other people got massively into D&D and other tabletop role-playing games, finding ways to connect to their friends through those means. But with so much time on your hands, you could also finally focus on playing all those JRPGs you were putting off due to having a job or spending time with your loved ones. You got your Final Fantasies, your Yakuzas, your Kingdom Hearts. Those are JRPGs, right? I mean, they're developed in Japan, so... And hey, there's this other big game series that's kinda niche, but you've been hearing a lot about it. And haven't you been getting into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure recently? Maybe it's time for you to go on a bizarre adventure yourself. These were basically the circumstances I found myself in when first playing Persona 5, give or take a couple massive details that deviate completely from all of this, but this is not about those. This is about how Persona 5 Royale with Cheese took me about 140 hours to finish back then, how it stayed on my mind for the next couple years, and why after all this time I replayed it, poured another 120 hours into the base game plus expansion, recorded all of it from my PS4 through a capture card and with OBS, and finally wrote this script, recorded a voiceover, and edited this video. All of this because I kept hearing people talk about how great this game was, because I kept seeing glowing review after review praising this game, and because I finally had the time to play it. And it was middling. Mid. 5 out of 10. Not even bad in an interesting way, but bad in a way that left me confuddled about why people liked this game in the first place. It made me mad. And that annoyance didn't just subside with time and then left. No. With people bringing it up again and again, talking about how much they loved the game, it left me irritated and feeling like I was crazy for feeling this way. Over time I found more and more people who felt the same as me, but they weren't vocal about it. Because what is there to complain about? The game is too long and overstays its welcome. There, that's the review. It doesn't do anything spectacular with any new idea, it just retreads the same ground over and over again. Smooth and hollow, not worth much mention besides an exhausted shrug and returning to whatever it was you were doing before. But it kept coming back. I kept coming back to it, over and over again for no apparent reason other than disappointment? Feeling betrayed for investing so much time into it, mostly against my own will? So in a final attempt to purge it from my mind, I picked up the pen and channeled all my thoughts on paper. And the result is this. A video serving as testament to the exorcist ritual that was creating it. And maybe a sign to those feeling the same way as me. Telling you that yes, this game does suck. And no, you're not crazy for thinking so. Persona 5 is just hella mid. Persona 5 is the story of the Phantom Thieves, a ragtag group of rebels risking their very lives to bring about change by fighting the unjust system they find themselves in. This story can be neatly divided into several arcs, the basic structure of which goes something like this. A new arc introduces a new villain and someone who has close personal ties to that villain. That person will realize how and why the villain is evil, they choose to defy them, and they awaken to their persona. Together with the thieves, they beat the arc's boss, the villain has a change of heart, and the new persona user joins the Phantom Thieves. The thieves celebrate the victory, and a new villain shows up. There's some deviations from this formula. Futaba's arc is the first that comes to mind, but otherwise the basic structure stays effectively the same between every arc. Which on its own I wouldn't mind, but when the same thing stares you in the face over and over again, you eventually realize that the only revolution brought about in the story is the game spinning in place. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My favorite arcs are the Kamoshida and Futaba arc. They pulled me in, made me invested in the characters and had a resolution that felt meaningful. The Saya arc is also interesting, though for different reasons. I'll get to that later though. In every other arc, I barely cared for the new member introduced and even less for the respective villain. They lack presence, you don't see them around, you barely interact with them, and whatever they are doing does not affect your daily life. In contrast to this stand Kamoshida and Futaba, the former being a teacher at your school, so you're always at least visually reminded of him, and the latter being the driving force behind her own arc. Futaba's palace shows us what is going on in her mind, which makes the resolution to her arc infinitely more meaningful, while her joining the group makes her character development tangible. And while her arc ends with helping her overcome one of her struggles, she's still socially anxious and easily overwhelmed outside her comfort zone. In the grand scheme of things, I'm almost compelled to call the way her character was written graceful. Almost. Most of my frustrations come from the main characters. When they're first introduced, the soon-to-be party members are almost always a neutral or even oppositional force to Joker and the Phantom Thieves. But over their arc and becoming a thief, we see them question their ways and come to their own conclusions during their respective arc. After that though, their character development just stops. We get to see some soul-searching during their respective confidants, but those have no connection to the main plot, barely mattering beyond the mechanical benefits you get from ranking them up. Getting the confidants to level 10 sees everyone doing some serious growth, but none of that is reflected in any way in how they act during the story. And sure, you can't control who the player is gonna spend time with, but this complete tonal separation between the main plot and the confidants creates such a strong feeling of dissonance, making what little arc there is to each character feel kinda meaningless. And since the characters never meaningfully grow throughout the story, the group dynamic stays the same as well. Joker, the silent protagonist and player character, is the Phantom Thieves leader on paper and their strongest member. The benefit of a silent protagonist, as I see it, is making it easier for the player to project themselves onto the character, giving them more agency and more investment in the story. But none of the dialogue options you can choose from hold any sway over how the Phantom Thieves act. The biggest impact they have is that you can be a little more serious or a little more goofy, and whether or not you praise your friends. These dialogue options are always phrased in a way that all of them feel like things Joker might actually say, which, together with his visual design as well as his reaction to things, means that Joker isn't a blank slate, but a character with his own personality. However, having him be a silent protagonist means we barely get to know who he is. And when the biggest impact a dialogue choice can have is be a middling response to your waifu, it makes Joker feel like nothing more than a catalyst, making stuff happen just by being there. The only real choice we get to make with regards to the story is between the good ending and the bad ending. When playing as a defined character, I want a game to explore who it is we're playing as. I want to learn about how they feel and how they think. I want to know what motivates them and what it means that they are at the center of the story. Joker, however, is little else than pure power. You could give the Phantom Thieves a one-hit kill gun, and it would have been about the same narrative impact. Morgana is the advisor of the thieves, the true leader and the effective protagonist of the game. He's by Joker's side almost as soon as the game starts and comments on just about anything that's happening or the player is doing. Hell, it feels like 95% of the time Morgana is effectively used as a stand-in for what should have been Joker's thoughts. When you reach the map boundaries, when you're too exhausted to go out, or when something big is coming up, it's Morgana telling you to turn around or stay in for the night. There's a negligibly tiny portion of the game where we get to hear Joker's thoughts, but for every other instance, Morgana and his point of view are imposed on you. Almost every interaction is at risk of having Morgana pop out of Joker's bag and saying some benign shit about whatever the fuck we were just doing. His oppressive presence rids the player of any agency, achieving linear storytelling in a very clunky way, making your input in the game feel useless. Shit, maybe it does make sense that Joker's Velvet Room is a prison. Morgana's confidant is one of the few that automatically level up while the story progresses, making him the only character who experiences gradual character exploration and the only character who has his character growth in the confidant be noticeable during the main story. Morgana is the protagonist of Persona 5. And even when he decides to briefly piss off in the Okumura arc, the story effectively focuses on him. This is the only time we get to see more of Joker's thoughts, and when I found out that he was actually majorly worried about Morgana, I fucking laughed in disbelief. And in addition to everything else, he's also consistently mean to Ryuji. So just to make it crystal clear, I can't fucking stand this guy. I have far less to say about the rest of the individual Phantom Thieves. They are both less frustrating and less interesting. Ryuji is the knuckle-headed athlete, Anne is the pretty girl who's not as vain as she seems, Yusuke is an eccentric who doesn't fully understand how the real world functions, Makoto is the exemplar student tasting freedom for the first time, Futaba is the nerdy hacker, and Haru is the sheltered princess. All 8 have led very different lives up until joining the Phantom Thieves, and all come from vastly different backgrounds. You'd expect that this would lead to them having some different viewpoints on things, which would have them clash in some sort of way, while in the end furthering everyone's horizon. But during their meetings, only about half of them actually contribute something to the conversation, while the others just paraphrase or flat out repeat what has already been said. And the only time anything even close to reflection happens is about 2/3 into the game, at the beginning of the Okumura arc. While Ryuji is convinced that the Phantom Thieves should act on their next target, everyone else is having second thoughts, wondering if what they do is right, except for Morgana, who, feeling like he's become obsolete, decides to run off after yelling at everyone, claiming the Phantom Thieves have lost their way. Over the next few in-game days, they fight with Morgana, he eventually gets over his stubbornness, and everyone makes up or something. This is literally my least favorite part of the game for obvious reasons, but in addition to how much I dislike Morgana, this whole sequence of events changes nothing in the team dynamic, even with it adding Haru to the roster. And of course, any of the doubts the thieves had about their work are proven wrong. The Okumura arc essentially tells us that the Phantom Thieves are right, that what they do is just, and that their work is necessary. And even before that, there was not a single shred of moral ambiguity to the story. The villains are always clearly abusing their power, and the thieves are left to deal with them in the only way they can, with a change of heart. And during all of this, any point of view the individual members of the Phantom Thieves may have barely comes up. They get together, they do their job, and then simply carry on with their lives. Thinking about the team dynamic made me start to wonder, do they ever just hang out? They're supposed to be friends, right? We do get a few scenes of them doing stuff together, but whatever they do, there's this weird vibe like they don't really know what to do. Which makes sense, they all know each other for less than a year, and with how different they are, there should be some weirdness between them. But these kids spend that whole year confronting distorted desires in the deepest depths of people's psyches. You'd think that at some point maybe they would talk about their own desires, their own dreams, their own fears, or just about how they feel. When they come together, they sometimes talk about their hopes for the future, albeit in pretty general terms. But the only one they'll tell how they really feel is Joker, during their confidants, which again have essentially no bearing on the main story. And the only evidence that other characters do talk to each other outside of those meetings is when they devise a new showtime. But apart from that, I don't think they really hang. And that weird dissonant feeling between how the characters act and what they are supposed to be extends to their actions as well. The Phantom Thieves are posed as this group of rebels fighting for change, but all they do is reinstate the status quo. In every arc, they go up against people who clearly abuse their position and power, but never question how that much power can be wielded without consequence to begin with. All of Persona 5's villains are based in reality, either drawing directly from individual cases like Madarame having similarities to Utamaru Kitagawa, or being an example of a more widespread issue like in Kamoshida's case. Lady Virgilia's video, Persona 5's villains are real, Japanese context of each palace ruler, gives a much more in-depth look at this, so give her a watch if you're interested in learning more about this. This focus on Japan and issues deeply connected to Japan's society came about after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake. Game director Katsura Hashino felt a shift in Japan's society and decided to scrap the initial idea of making Persona 5 about exploration and international travel, and instead wanted to look inward, at Japan. I'll link to a translated interview in the comments if you want to read more about his thoughts on the matter. Reading the interview, I got the impression that he thinks the strong ideals and ambitions of teenagers fighting for change is necessary, but that they are ultimately too naive to see the bigger picture. And I kinda hate to admit it, but it makes the group dynamic and the way the characters act make more sense as well. None of them question the societal structures that have failed them, and instead they hang on to those same roles they played before. Maybe they adhere to familiar concepts to gain some safety while they go through all that? What the Phantom Thieves are dealing with sounds so far above anything a group of teenagers can be reasonably expected to handle, and these structures could give them a much needed sense of security. But by not challenging the systems that allowed these villains to wield and abuse their power in the first place, it makes them seem like they believe those systems are either right and worth keeping, or don't believe that they can be changed at all. Instead, they want to give that power to someone who wields it responsibly, which would also explain why they trust Sai and Sojiro despite their multiple remarks about shitty adults. The Thieves' goal is to prevent society from falling apart. But instead of bettering it and changing the exploitable power structures, they protect society by removing those who use their power selfishly, which on paper isn't bad, but also doesn't prevent the same thing from happening again. That's why talking to people from different walks of life and social backgrounds is so important. To see and understand the struggles of other people and to consider their realities as well when fighting for change. Acting without that empathy and consideration makes the Phantom Thieves more akin to a specialized task force instead of rebels overthrowing the system. Talking about the team's dynamics and the members' relationships, I also want to talk about romance in Persona 5. I actually liked most of the romantic relationships and thought they were pretty sweet, but also romancing someone seems pretty inconsequential. On a gameplay level, it doesn't matter if the relationship is platonic or romantic, since ranking up the confidants gives you the same benefits either way. And as with all the other confidants, once you reach level 10, there's no gameplay incentive to keep meeting up with them. Ignoring the relationship after maxing out the confidant has no repercussions either, which is a bit dissonant to how intensely the romanceable characters express their feelings and desire to be with you. It also seems like the only thing that happens when you date multiple people without either's knowledge or consent is a cutscene. Judging by their dialogue, I'd say it's pretty safe to say that all love interests are only interested in a monogamous relationship. So it doesn't feel great at all that you're almost encouraged to betray your partner's trust. Relationships are a delicate and difficult thing, and the way they're portrayed here doesn't quite sit right with me. The dates where you don't rank up the confidant though are some of my favorite little moments from the game. This go around I dated Hifumi, though I chose to romance Makoto on my first playthrough, and judging from the popularity polls, it seems a lot of people did the same. I think Makoto's popularity is in large parts due to her being the more or less canon choice. As queen, she is the Thieves' strategist and tends to lead the discussions on how to deal with the current target, and she's given even more weight in Sai's arc, with the target this time being her own sister. Additionally, she gets introduced as the principal's pawn first, following Joker around in a cutely obvious way, but soon decides to join the Thieves and becomes a vital part of their operations. Throughout all that, we get to see a lot more of her and her inner workings, which gives her a lot more chances to endear the audience to her. And then there's her confidant that, for one, has fake dating potentially going into real dating, and also sees her step up for herself and not just live according to the expectations everyone else has for her. It's a powerful motive, and something that a lot of people can deeply relate to. The final nail in the coffin IMO is the scene when they sneak into Sojiro's house and Makoto gets so spooked she latches onto Joker's arm. Honestly, thinking about all of this, Makoto would have made a great female protagonist. Her level of input and agency in everything the Thieves do feels like she's effectively second in command after Morgana, giving her a hell of a lot more weight than Joker ever had. Someone I have left unaddressed so far is Joker's canon rival, the ace detective himself and #1 smug bastard, Akechi. Akechi is the most direct threat the Phantom Thieves face throughout the story. The self-made genius pops up for a short time in each arc, makes some clever deductions and shows, through thinly veiled threats, that he is on to the Thieves. Somewhat similar to Kamoshida, Akechi's presence as an opposing force is palpable, and the player realizes very quickly that he is at least partially responsible for the mental shutdown cases. Though unlike other instances, the game can only hint at Akechi's true motives, which vastly improves watching his spiel in the Sai arc. We know for damn sure that Akechi is the one who sold the Thieves out by now, but the characters can't know. Or at least it feels like that until you realize that the few instances of memory haze Joker experiences are only there to hide from the player that Joker and Morgana are actually a step ahead of Akechi. This could have maybe been a potentially interesting reveal, but the only instances of memory haze are so conveniently happening when they talk about their plan to catch Akechi that it becomes extremely obvious and heavy-handed. Hell, the whole damn video game up until now has been part of the setup in trying to find out who the master puppeteer behind the scenes is. Despite this, Akechi is the best written character simply by default. He deceives and tricks and lies his way into working with the Phantom Thieves. We learn that he crafted his reputation as genius detective by using his powers and wants to dramatically betray Shido in the end. Akechi is the one character where the game cannot allow itself to present you a unanimous sentiment of "this is how you should feel", and instead they show you someone who is similar to the thieves but works in different ways. His elusive presence, spiteful scheming, and all but explicitly homoerotic interest in Joker make him one of the most memorable characters in the whole game. His stubborn obsession with getting his revenge on Shido initially came off as a bit weird to me. He is supposed to be this mastermind killer guy, but in the end his motives seem so childish? But his image as genius detective being completely created through his persona's abilities and not his smarts made it all kinda click for me. All the characters are actually written very consistently, they just don't have a ton of depth, but they feel very fleshed out and like people you might actually meet. Towards the end of the game, Akechi and the thieves join forces to tackle Sai's palace. This uneasy alliance is part of what makes all of the Sai arc feel like the true climax of the game, which is extra funny since it entirely sidelines everyone besides Makoto and Akechi. I mean sure, literally every problem the thieves experienced are the result of one of Shido's machinations or other, but emotionally the Shido arc doesn't hold a fucking candle to Sai's arc. All the different forces that were threatening the thieves come to a head and find resolution here. Sai and the justice system, Akechi and the police as well as the public, even Makoto, who formerly worked for the school and is now a part of the Phantom Thieves. All these different convictions clash to come out on top, and after the thieves fought through all that mess, the Shido arc feels much more empty, like it's a merely formality to bring the story to a textual conclusion, unless you're playing Royal, which I did. Sai's palace even feels like they put much more care and attention to detail into it. The gambling games stand out among the rest, even if they are in the end just very shiny puzzles. And there's even a test of strength where Joker gets to absolutely wipe the floor with some fools solo style, which is something that almost never happens in this game. All of this helps Akechi stand out. He has agency of his own, we get to know him as both an antagonist and an ally, and in the end, he fucking dies. No wonder the Fujos are all over this piece of shit. He serves as a direct foil to Joker and the thieves. Given the same powers as Joker by Igor and Yeldabov, he chose to go at it alone, foregoing any potential strength in connecting to others and becoming our twisted antagonist. Him dying to save the thieves is a nice emotional beat, but I believe his full potential would have been as the final boss, achieving his revenge on Shido and stepping up to the chalice, harnessing its power to beat the world into submission. The meltdown he had in Shido's palace would have been a real nice last few words during the final battle, but it feels much more tonally appropriate for him to just die in some ditch, much as I wish it were different. I think this is all I have to say about the writing of base Persona 5, which leaves the gameplay aspects and the Royal expansion. Since the gameplay doesn't really differ all that much between the base game and Royal, I'll do that first. The combat system itself is solid, but plateaus very quickly. Exploit elemental weaknesses, apply your buffs, heal when necessary. But you can't go on autopilot either. Enemies punish mistakes more and more severely, so you can't just start blasting without higher and higher risk of taking down yourself as well. Unless you're running through with an almighty element, lol. There's a sort of puzzle-like approach to all of it, because there is always a combination of personae and actions that will allow you to breeze through every fight in a palace. Even with an optimal approach though, fights take too long. Persona 5 is a stylish game, but the style bloats and stretches something like combat out to the point of annoyance, which adds to the mental drain. Again, you can't turn off your brain even if you have the solution to a palace, and that solution will usually involve more than one character. Which is exhausting. Commanding 4 people while cycling through all their attention-demanding animations is exhausting. A way to make combat easier on your brain though is using the act freely tactic. It probably means you're not playing optimal anymore, but it's also another dimension to use for characterization. A character's persona is a manifestation of their inner workings after all. The persona's attribute spread, elemental affinities and skill set solidify that in the game's mechanics, while seeing how a character wields that manifestation of self can give an even deeper understanding of who they are. Also, I need to add that for my first playthrough I did not focus on Ryuji's confidant for a long time, so for most of the game I ran through without the quick kill ability, which is probably where a good extra 20 hours or so came from. When you are not in combat, you're probably running around or navigating some menus. And those menus, they got cool effects, that paper cutout mixed media look, some animations when you go between sub-menus, as well as a unique art and animations for every shop. It looks awesome, but is that what you want from a menu? There's so many little things that draw your attention, every animation takes a bit of time to play, and all of that adds up, ultimately bloating the menus with noise to a point where I didn't want to use them more than necessary. And the clutter doesn't end there. Every environment you travel through is busy with visual details. A friend of mine pointed out the dungeon corridors and the streets of Tokyo feel super similar. Narrow, cramped, and easy to get lost in. Yes, they are a distorted version of reality, but running through a palace doesn't feel that different from walking through Tokyo. The main difference to me is that there's more mechanics for traversing dungeons, making the real world feel more restricted. All of those mechanics are also just dumped on you, and you have to remember they exist for the few times you actually use them. And even with all those options, running around the dungeons feels weirdly clunky and stiff. Which isn't helped by the fact that the dungeons are fucking long, even with the safe rooms. They feel like things you're not supposed to beat in one in-game day or even one sitting, but you're highly incentivized to. Chipping away at the dungeons piece by piece puts a hefty toll on your available time, since Joker will be too exhausted to go out at night if you run around the palace all afternoon. Every dungeon also has unique themed puzzles and gimmicks, which is something I quite like. It adds variety. But every time you interact with a puzzle, at least two characters will talk about what the nature of this puzzle is and what its solution could be, which is fine the first time. It makes sense that Joker and the thieves would talk about these things, but this happens every time you check a puzzle, and quickly becomes annoying. It's another instance outside of the main plot that the game needs you to be sure you understood what it wants from you, which inversely led to me sometimes being so fucking confused by what I should do in a puzzle, since I didn't want to sit through 3 to 5 boxes of text. And when you're not delving the current palace, you're either combing through mementos, working a part-time job, among other things. So you better choose how you spend your time wisely. Time in Persona games is segmented into time slots that encompass only a certain time of day, and time only progresses to the next slot when you're doing something that isn't shopping. After school and evening is your free time, and like previously mentioned, going to a palace or mementos during the afternoon will have Joker be too exhausted to do anything in the evening. At the start of the game, there's not much you're allowed to do anyway, but slowly you'll be able to access more people to meet and more places to go, like the batting cages. If you have any ambitions of being optimal, you gotta strategize the hell out of the system. Since not everyone is available on every day, and there's scripted events that will happen regardless of what you choose to do, and a few other factors like the weather. This could be a way to make playthroughs more unique and allow for more replayability, but it just stresses me the hell out, man. And similarly to how I didn't rank up Ryuji's confidant for a long time, I didn't max out Kawakami's confidant in my first playthrough, which means I completely missed out on an option that literally gives you back the evening time slot after dungeon diving. After stressing so much in my first playthrough about which confidant to rank up and worrying about raising social stats, there was an unbelievable euphoria to just going the fuck to bed and ending the day early in this playthrough. These next few points didn't fit into the structure of the previous segments, so here they are just on their own. One is the framing. The framing kinda falls apart instantly. Hey, this is an interrogation, but we only have like 5 minutes. Please remember everything in excruciating detail and tell me what happened over the course of the last half year, okay? It's a cool idea, playing this sort of flashback and then jumping into the story's final act. Could have been fun. But framing it as Joker recalling every event in excruciating detail makes that narrative device fall completely flat. The plot twists and exposition. Giving your audience enough clues for them to piece together the plot through understanding your characters is awesome. It means you've done a great job at conveying those characters. Persona 5, however, leaves no room for interpretation and goes through lengths of exposition to make sure the player simply has no other choice but to understand exactly what just happened and why. It feels as if the game doesn't trust the player to comprehend its story. Additionally, it relies solely on its dialogue, when character acting and set dressing could have enabled forms of subtler storytelling which, again, this game completely lacks. The comedy. Persona 5's attempts at comedy are pretty tragic. It mostly boils down to Ryuji being a bit dense or unsubtle, and being met with what I can only describe as cartoon repercussions. I especially resent the moment after Shido's palace where he gets completely beaten up after narrowly escaping. Nothing about that is funny. It's just needlessly cruel and stupid. The music. The music on its own isn't bad, but by the end of the game some tracks have been severely overplayed. And even if I wanted to listen to Jamiroquai Light, the sound effects are so disproportionately loud it makes it really hard to enjoy the music while actually playing the game. In case you somehow haven't noticed, Persona 5 doesn't have audio sliders, so it's either tolerable audio peaks and no music, or listening to the music at risk of the sound effects shredding your eardrums. Visual noise. I have already touched on my issues with the game's visuals when I talked about the menus, the combat UI, and how it feels to traverse Tokyo and the cognitive world, but it's so ever-present that I wanted to bring it up again. There's not a single moment where you aren't bombarded with information and visual cues on screen. In all the situations I didn't bring it up, you're just not doing as much, so you can dedicate more brain power to not being overwhelmed. Especially frustrating to me is the oppressiveness of all the UI elements when you're just running around. The game doesn't look bad at all, but I wish I could appreciate that more without having to tune out about half the screen at all times. And finally, some general annoyances that I don't want to get in depth on. Joker's voice. Both the Japanese and the English one. I just don't think they fit all that well. Why is the game so horny? And what the fuck is with the anime cutscenes looking so damn desaturated? Oh, and also, why does the auto advance button turn off after every damn dialogue? Base Persona 5's ending point is not too shabby, but the people behind it seem to think they could have done better. The fight with Yaldabaoth and the resolution of the story was nice with an appropriate level of finality to it. Though actually getting to the fight felt like a stretch. Shido's palace, despite being grand on a technical level, is neither a great transition to the final battle with the God of Control, nor does it hit as an emotional climax. Only Joker is really privy to the God of Control being a thing, but being a silent character means we miss out on him relaying anything about that to the thieves, and once again it's Morgana's job to lead the thieves into the depths of mementos and make everyone aware of the Velvet Room. This could have been an awesome moment where Joker tells his team that there is one last job to do and them being confused, but since they trust Joker, they'll follow his lead and investigate further. Shido's palace thus can't hit as the emotional climax of the story, since it's sort of this fake-out moment where all the strings connect back to Shido, but actually it's much bigger than this. However, even before, it feels strangely hollow how Shido is at the center of all of this. The main motivation we are presented with to kick his ass seems to be that he ruined Joker's life after Joker finally remembers that it was Shido who got him falsely accused. But the entire game hinges on this premise. Not only that, but not a single person from back where Joker's from even pretends to care about his new life. And all the other shit Shido has pulled, as well as the shit the other thieves have gone through because of that, is so much worse than what happened to Joker. Hell, he even made the only fucking friends he has during that year. It just feels really weird to effectively denounce the whole game like that. Royal is a redo of the original ending. Same themes and everything, but in higher visual quality. Every important character gets a new winter outfit, additional portrait sprites, some of which get only used once, and we get a few new tracks to listen to, as well as this visual effect on the border of the screen. The writing is also notably better. Ryuji especially has a lot more depth to him and is taken much more serious than in the base game. It honestly feels like the writers apologizing to the audience. My biggest Royal-specific gripe is how the game just skips from Christmas and the end of base Persona 5 to the New Year and the start of Royal. There's a full week where the thieves have nothing to do. At least give us a little fluff or a slice of life to tide us over. Though that might have only ended in the characters reminiscing about the past year, their dreams, and assessing where they are in life right now, something that they all have to ponder in Royal while they face the ideal painless reality that Maruki created for them. I like what Royal does with what it has. Without serious effort and time, there's not that much you can do with Persona 5 as a starting point, and I've gone over the why pretty extensively here. All my other annoyances are the same as in the base game, though having a few new music tracks inversely made the old tracks feel out of place and even more exhausting to listen to. Something funny I noticed was that almost all the animated cutscenes in Royal took place in more artificial lighting situations that made it make sense for those colors to be more saturated, while also making the base game anime cutscenes not feel out of place. Persona 5 Royal ends with properly tying up all the ambitions of the individual thieves. Facing the painless reality that they once have wished for made them reconsider their ways, and in the time it took them to overturn Joker's wrongful sentence in their original reality, they found what they wanted to do. It's a nice moment where they all share their plans for the future, and as it turns out, they will all start going their own ways around the same time as Joker leaving for his hometown. This makes Joker's leave feel less weird, and like the Phantom Thieves actually meant something to the ones involved. Like it actually impacted the trajectory of their lives, and not just the characters hollowly attesting to such. Royal is very nice, but in the end it's not enough to outweigh the annoyances I've had with base Persona 5. There's only so much senseless repetition that I can endure and am willing to. The flat characters are probably the worst offender here. I would have loved to see them disagree with each other more often and in general force the player to make more difficult decisions, potentially changing the group's dynamic. As it stands though, the Phantom Thieves feel a lot more like a group of co-workers instead of unlikely allies who become friends. Morgana being the effective center of the story and the game's general writing made me feel disrespected as a player. It takes away all of the agency the player could have in the narrative and doesn't even let them come to their own conclusions. The world itself isn't bad. There's tons of small things to find around Tokyo and many a place to just chill out in. Though I wish the game would be more inviting to hang out in those spaces. The constant reminder of the next deadline looms across the top right corner of your screen, and the permanent onslaught of UI elements that you can't turn off take up what feels like at least a third of the screen at all times. With my New Game Plus run not having to focus on social stats and combat prowess though, I could enjoy the details a lot more. So to end this video off on a positive note, here's some of my favorite things I've found. I found those pods standing around in the first floor of the school around when the Inokashira Park cleanup thing happens, so I thought these were there because someone specifically scrounged them all up to use on the trip to cook. It turns out they're there all year round, but they still hold a special place in my heart because of that. There's this obsessive girl subplot that ends with them trying to start becoming friends. It's kind of weird, I didn't catch all of it, but it's so removed from everything else happening in the game that I kind of enjoyed for that. It's just its own little thing happening. The jazz club that Akechi invites Joker into and then Joker can invite his teammates into to just hang out and listen to some jazz or some singers is modeled after a real-life place in Kichijoji that I actually went to. I was really surprised to see that the piano hall or jazz bar sometime was very faithfully recreated in Persona 5. It's a pretty famous spot and definitely worth checking out. And yeah, and in general, Tokyo does just look like that in real life. Persona 5's version of Tokyo is a really faithfully done recreation of the city. In general, I also really like the backdrops and surroundings inside the date places you can go to. Like when you invite a confidant to go someplace and you just get a little scenery, almost like a diorama, where you can imagine the characters running around in. They're all really detailed and give you the impression of the place without showing you so much of it. All of the backdrops for these locations are like a snapshot of that place. They do a really good job at conveying what that place feels like. I think my favorites here are Chinatown and the aquarium. I just really like them visually. They're nice. I also found this chicken while running around Kichijoji inside one of the bars. It's just there. One of my favorite little interactions inside the game was probably the sweet potato seller in Young and Jaya. He comes out when it starts to get cold, so like in the November arc, I believe. I didn't look at the footage for this, so this might be wrong. Yeah, it's quite nice. Just gives it a little bit of a lived-in feeling to have this old neighborhood where there's like this very residential area of Tokyo, and there's just this guy coming up to sell his sweet potatoes to people running through the cold. It's nice. It paints a nice little picture. I really like how they decorate the city for different festive occasions. So for Halloween, for example, inside the base game, you get these special cutscenes to show that people dress up for Halloween inside the subway, and also you get these lights, decorations and everything hanging over the streets of Shibuya and over the main street area. And the same thing happens around Christmas, at least the decoration stuff. It's really nice, and also makes the city feel a little bit more alive. And finally, there's this weird-ass couch segment I stumbled into in Kichijoji. I just randomly activated the third sense power, and yeah, you can gain some free courage from just sitting on that couch for some fucking reason. It's kind of funny. Shit, okay, yeah, that's it. We're done. Making this video was a way for me to work through how I felt about this piece of media, and it helped me gain a lot of clarity. It also made me realize that I may be more of a hater than I thought I was. With this being finished, I can finally leave it behind and focus on other things. More positive things. And I already have a couple in mind. I'm not gonna put myself on a schedule either. Making videos here is for myself first and foremost. And if you're hearing this, thanks for sticking with me this far. And hey, maybe I'll see you whenever one of those other things is out. Special thanks goes out to the people in my life whose creativity made me want to make things myself and supported me in this journey. Super extra special thanks to one friend in particular. Getting to hate on this game together with you was a big part in pushing me through all of this. I guess you could say this thing is dedicated to you. Love you. Bye!